Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to episode 126 of the Extra Mile podcast. This is Jackson Mummy. And as we are releasing this will be the last podcast episode for 2016. If you're like me, you're probably saying, oh, please, couldn't this year get over soon enough? In any event, because this is our last podcast of the year, I thought it would be appropriate today, instead of doing an interview or something else, I would just recap some of the top stories and some of the things that we talked about in the last year. So this will probably be a little shorter episode perhaps than normal, and I hope that you're having a wonderful holiday and enjoying some time off. And if you're getting ready for the upcoming bar exams, before I jump into this sort of retrospective, I want to invite you, looking forward, to join me on Thursday. That would be December 29th at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. We're going to be offering a free live masterclass called How to Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. I'm going to look at the 4 steps that you have to take in order to pass the bar. Now, this is a 90-minute masterclass. It's live and it's totally free, but you do need to register, and I encourage you to jump online. We've got a big crowd already signed up. You can register in one of a couple of ways. You can go to our website at celebrationbarreview.com. You'll see a button there to claim your free seat, or you can text the phrase "Next Bar Exam" to the number 33444. Again, text the phrase "Next Bar Exam" to 33444, and we'll get you registered. Now, for some reason, Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern doesn't work on your schedule, or you just can't wait that long. If you go back to our webpage, to the front page, you'll also see a button for an on-demand version of the webinar, and you can listen to that and watch it right away. Same great information, same great offers, but you don't have to wait. So I always say that the magic happens live, and I do hope you'll join me this Thursday. We've got some great information to share with you. And if you're taking the exam in February or in July of 2017, I think this is information you don't want to miss out on. Well, with all of that, let's sort of pivot here for a moment and just sort of talk about what this last year has been like in the bar exam world. And if I had to characterize it in a single word, I'd say awful. It's been a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad year, and that was at its best. We started the year back in episode 55 on the broadcast. And I started with a series at the beginning of last year called The Truth About the Bar Exam. And we began by looking at what the examiners were really doing, the changes in the exam and the changes in pass rates, the changes in scoring. And we talked about how you could respond. And those were episodes 55 and 56. And I'm going to list these out and put them in our show notes so you can link to them easily. But you can always find all of these podcasts on our website. If you go to celebrationbarreview.com, there's a link at the top for podcasts, and you can click through and find all of the podcasts and show notes from the beginning of the series. But in any event, we started by talking about what was going on. And I think that the answer as the year unfolded was that the bar examiners essentially have developed de facto quotas. They're simply not going to admit above a fixed number of people in each jurisdiction. And each state is making that decision independently, and they're arriving at those numbers however they do it, and they're arriving at their scoring system however they wish. But the net result across the board in every major jurisdiction was a year in which we saw declining bar membership and declining pass rates virtually without exception. One little bump, one slight uptick in New York at the second exam in July when they switched to UBE. But outside of that, it was a horrible year for pass rates. Now, why are the examiners doing that? Well, I think it's a matter of economics. I think it's a matter of too many attorneys or potential attorneys in the marketplace. And the bar examiners are responding to that pressure from their bar associations, not by making the exams tougher. I think this is something to keep in mind. I don't think the exams themselves are inherently harder than I've seen them over 25 years. I mean, incrementally, perhaps slightly tougher. I think the real difference is in the way that they're scoring them. And one of the trends that we talked about during the year was this idea of people who are grading bar essays as a side hustle. It's just a weekend gig. They're employees hired by their local bar exam jurisdictions to grade and report essay scores. And the truth of the matter is that this is not an ideal reader. It may be a good economic choice, particularly in a state like California, which has thousands of essays to grade and read. But the reality is that what we're seeing are graders who are really uninformed, uninterested, and frankly giving sort of the default non-passing scores unless they see something really extraordinary. Now, along the way, there's been a lot of discussion, as there always is, about what's the best way to write essays across the country. And there continues to be this interesting body of people who cling stubbornly to the notion that what you did in law school would be what would work in the bar exam itself. And I've talked about that pretty extensively throughout the year, but one of the things I did in episode 75 is I talked about the bar exam in law schools and why that writing style really wasn't very efficient. And pointed out that that style, that IRAC writing style, which is primarily the style taught by the large big box bar reviews, continues to be not very successful. And the numbers prove that. When you look at the overall pass rates, certainly in February we had actually a minority of people of overall bar takers passing. And when you look to the July rates, where you've got a lot more first-time takers and we're barely over 50% overall pass rates across the country, what you see is that this traditional style of preparing and writing is not very effective. And so the days when the big box bar reviews could confidently say to all of their students and applicants, just do what we say and you'll pass, well, those days are gone. And so we talked about the importance of being a good consumer, about thinking about what's going on, and really being focused on what the examiners were looking for. And I actually talked about that a little bit in California, looking to see if I can find which particular episode that was. Oh my goodness. Well, one of them, in episode 71, I talked about 5 lessons from the February exams, and I think that's a really good episode to check out if you didn't hear it, if you don't remember it, because I talked about some of those things that were going on there. But I also talked about what I called the Emperor Has No Clothes, the California phenomenon in which it became clear that this writing style didn't work. And that was episode 88. It was back in May. Really encourage you to listen to that particular episode. We talked about why that writing style just is not very effective, why law school is not like the bar exam. And when you figure that the bar examiners are really trying to limit the number of new members in the bar, that kind of issue spotting, information dump on the reader simply didn't prove to be very effective. And that was certainly one of the lessons that we learned coming out of both February and July. So I spent some time early in the year, as I say, talking about what I described as some truths about the bar exam, some things that were really going on that I thought that bar takers ought to be aware of. Now, it wasn't all doom and gloom. We also talked during the year about ways that you could improve your scores, and we talked specifically about the multi-state, and there were a lot of changes in 2016, and we see some coming for 2017. In episode 63, I talked about how to raise your MBE score by 15 points, and I talked about the importance of intuition and really trying to not brute force your way through the multi-state exam. Now, for those of you that haven't been following the MBE lately, a couple of things have happened. As you undoubtedly know, we've now got 7 subjects with the addition of federal civil procedure and jurisdiction. But more significantly, I suppose, in some respects, is that now we've got only 175 of the 200 MBE questions that are going to count for scoring come 2017. Now, I've got a lot of questions about this, about whether or not this means you've got to be even better or the scaling changes or something else should change. And I think that the ultimate answer, and we won't know for sure until we see the first couple of rounds of exams to see exactly what's happening, but my belief and assumption based on reviewing the exams and having been doing this for so many years is that this is more of an inside baseball kind of change. That is to say, now you're going to have 25 questions in each of 7 subjects that count. And to me, this is good news. I'd rather anything that could take away a few more property questions in my world would be good, and replacing it with just a more balanced exam across all 7 subjects. I don't know that you're going to have to do better on those 175 than you used to do on the 190. And I know there's some people that are saying, well, but you had those extra 15 questions and those could have boosted your score. Now, I think by the time the examiners scale this and put it back together, we're not going to see much change in the overall scoring metrics for the bar exam. Now, that might sound like good news. The bad news is that those metrics are going down. The bar exam in 2016, the multi-state exam, continued to see a decline in overall scores. And so we continue to see that what it's taking to be successful on the MBE is changing. And one of the things that I talked about during the year, when I talked about some of the different approaches that we apply, one of them was photo reading. I talked about that several times, but in episode 66, I discussed that back in February of 2016. When you take information in the non-conscious brain versus the conscious brain, you're then in a much better position to be able to find correct answers intuitively, spontaneously. And that spontaneous activation of information is the approach that we've been teaching our students successfully on the MBE for several years now. And we saw big jumps in our students' MBE scores throughout the year on both February and in July. And we did a whole bunch of interviews with folks throughout the year, and I'm not going to identify any of them specifically. I think they're all kind of interesting. But any of the Hangouts that we did, you will hear a consistent repeated pattern of people saying that they followed our approach to the MBE and the essay writing. And in many cases, the folks that I had the privilege of working with and interviewing were repeat bar takers who were able to reach that point of being successful on the bar by changing their approach. Instead of trying to brute force their way through the exam, trying to figure out all of the intricate details and nuances of the multi-state, they were much more intuitive in their study approach, much more intuitive in the way that they took the exam. And we saw great success. We saw those points jump for a lot of people. So I really encourage you to check out photo reading and some of the episodes that we did there during the year. Well, what else was going on in 2016? Oh my. Back in May, I did what turned out to be by far my most successful but also most controversial episode called Who Will Never Pass the Bar? And I talked about 5 groups of people that I thought would never pass the bar. And holy cow, did that get a lot of reaction. I think it's really hard for people to hear some basic truths, but there were some truths about the kinds of people who would never pass the bar. And if you're curious about that, it's episode 85, and I invite you to go in and check that out. I'm not actually trying to be mean to anyone. I'm just talking about some truths. And there are some people who have behaviors and circumstances that will keep them from being successful. And if you fall into one of those groups, it doesn't mean you can't pass. It just means you got to change your behavior, change your circumstance. And so we hope that we can assist you with that. But definitely talked about some of those groups. And one of the big groups I talked about were people that really weren't very proficient in English. And this got a lot of reaction. Certainly, my intention was not to say that we in any way were disparaging of people for whom English is not a first language. I have a substantial number of foreign-trained attorneys for whom English is not their first language, and I love working with them. But the reality is that you have to get more proficient in your English. This bar exam is tough, even if you were born and raised here and English is your first language. When it's a second or third or fourth language, it's almost impossible to do unless you are proficient in that language. And so we talked about the importance of that and some techniques and some resources to help you with English skills if that was one of the concerns that you had, but also encouraged people to start really early if they were in that circumstance. So if you're a foreign-trained attorney, I want to invite you as you're listening today, if you're listening to this pretty close to our release date, this is the time for you to begin studying for the July 2017 exams, maybe even February 2018. So you can't be too early and give yourself too much time when it comes to that particular group. So that's one of the 5 groups. I'll let you listen to the podcast to find out the others, but definitely got a lot of reaction to that, and it was an interesting approach. I also did an episode, number 92, where I talked about writing 100 essays as not being the way to prepare for the bar exam. I got a lot of reaction to that. A lot of people had said, well, you got to write a lot. You got to do a bunch of things. I mean, it's a lot of the big box bar review stuff being thrown back over and over and over again, even when it's not successful. And in that episode, I talked a little bit about why that kind of an approach to writing probably was not going to be successful. Well, we rounded the February exam and started heading towards the July 2016 exam. And February 2016 was certainly a train wreck, as I described it, in terms of overall pass rates in every jurisdiction, incredibly low numbers and very difficult for people. And yet we had some extraordinary success stories, and we tried to share a few of those with you throughout the year of people that survived even when those exams were really, really bad. One of the most bizarre stories of 2016 was in Georgia, where the Georgia bar examiners inadvertently misscored 90 exams over two separate administrations and told people they had failed when in fact they had passed. And in episode 110 and 111, I talked about that in detail, and then we did an interview with one of the students that was affected, episode 113, our interview with Kimberly Campbell. And so what ended up happening was that the Georgia examiners had made mistakes in their calculations. They had told people they failed when in fact they passed, and then many months later, they came back and acknowledged their mistake. And that was really a surprise, not that they had made a mistake, but that any bar examiners had acknowledged that. And some good news for certainly those 90 people. And it's a great story. Definitely encourage you to check out at least our interview with Kimberly in episode 113. Well, as the July bar exam came in 2016, tough exam around the country. A lot of folks taking the exam, but also really struggling. But it also marked the first time that the uniform bar exam was being used in the jurisdiction of New York. And this was a big change from the traditional New York bar exam, which was state-specific, into the uniform bar exam, the UBE, to the New York bar takers. Now, that's a trend that's going to continue in 2017. The UBE is expanding into New Jersey. It's coming to Massachusetts. It's on the, excuse me, it's choking me up. It's so important. But it's being considered in Texas, being considered in Illinois. Right now, the UBE is about, I want to say 22, 23 jurisdictions. So growing. Now, I had presumed that the UBE would not be a very good move necessarily for New York bar takers, in that you could not take the exam somewhere else and waive into New York. Well, as it turns out, I was wrong about that. You could, in fact, take the UBE somewhere else, and if you got a high enough score, and New York, strangely enough, picked a low passing score. They only required a 266, and there are other jurisdictions using the same test, the UBE, who have much higher required scores. I have no idea why that's so. But in New York, if you got a 266 and you took something a little special at-home 50-question open book exam on New York law, then you could, in fact, become a member of the New York bar. Well, what we saw happen in July was a slight uptick in pass rates in New York, and that was good news. That was probably the only good news that I can point to across the country in terms of a national trend. Now, what makes it interesting to me is that in 2017, as New Jersey comes online, and DC is already online, all of them have 266 passing scores. So I think we're going to see more people trying to sit for one of those exams. If they don't make it, and they score 260 but not 266, I think we're going to see more people using those passing scores in other jurisdictions to waive into the bars of other UBE jurisdictions. So if you got a 261 or a 262, you could have waived into a couple of other states even if you had failed the New York bar where you sat for the UBE. So there's a lot of information about that, a lot of things going on with the UBE and the differences that I think that created in the bar exam itself. And we're going to keep a close eye on that in 2017. I think that's big news. We talked a little bit about it in episode 118, where we talked about the New York results from the July exam. So one of the things I would encourage people to do as they're thinking about 2017 is look carefully at the jurisdictions. Think about where you want to take the exam. It's the same test in any UBE jurisdiction, exactly the same test, given the same day, the same way. Now, that also takes away one option that used to be there, and that was that you could do a Tuesday, Wednesday bar exam, for example, and then sit for New Jersey, which was a Wednesday, Thursday exam. That option is off the table now. New Jersey has switched to a Tuesday, Wednesday, along with the rest of the UBE. So the days of doing Florida on Tuesday, multi-state on Wednesday, New Jersey on Thursday, or New York Tuesday, multi-state Wednesday, New Jersey Thursday, those days are gone. Now you just take your exam. And by the way, if you take the Florida exam, it does you no good with the UBE. Just to be clear for everyone, Florida, California, Texas, Georgia are all non-UBE jurisdictions. I think there's a possibility Texas may swing to the UBE, but that's still way, way out if it's going to happen at all. So those are a few of the things that we see. I think UBE is probably the big story of testing coming up in 2017, and I think it's going to continue to expand. I find it to be an easier test than a lot of the state exams, so definitely something to keep in mind there. Throughout the year, we talked about different things that were happening in particular jurisdictions. We talked a little bit about Florida results in episode 112. We talked about a recap of the July exam in episode 105, and I encourage you to check out those episodes if you're interested in those jurisdictions. And of course, California is always a big jurisdiction, a lot going on in California always, and we talked about that in the episodes here at the end of the year, episodes 122 and 123. We had some discussion of Cal results as those came out. The Cal results are probably the most stunning at the end of the year from the July exam. They were awful results, dropped by, I think, the lowest July results in history in California. And there's been a real outcry about that. We've had some law school deans who've been writing about it. We've had some law school deans resign over their school's bar scores. The general presumption seems to be that the Cal bar is about 10 percentage points in passing too low. It's in the low 30s. That's an extraordinarily low number overall. But even for first-time ABA-approved law schools, the pass rate was just barely over 60%. That's a really, really low number. And so there's a lot of pushback in California. And we'll see what happens there. One big change that's coming is a change in format and scoring in July, in July 2017. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this, California is going to move from a 3-day test in February to a 2-day test in July. They're going to go from 6 one-hour essays down to 5 one-hour essays. They're going to eliminate the 3-hour performance tests and replace them with 2 separate 90-minute performance tests. These would be the multi-state performance tests. But the big change to me, beyond all of that, is the scoring. Up until now, the multi-state has been worth only 35% of the overall score in California, and the balance, 65%, has come from the written portion of the exam. Starting in July 2017, that changes. It will be a 50-50 balance between the multi-state day and the California day. So California day on Tuesday, the 5 essays and 2 performance tests, really a long day, but only in one day. And then 50% of your score will come from the MBE on Wednesday. So I think that's going to make a big change for a lot of people, particularly those that are struggling with their writing, those that have been locked into sort of the law school IRAC approach. This is definitely good news for you. I think it gives you a chance to up your game and make sure that that multi-state score gets up high where it's objectively scored, not subjectively scored. So I'm looking for some changes when we get to July of 2017 in California. I do think the February 2017 California exam is going to continue to be tough, and I'm expecting probably the lowest pass rates of all time in February 2017. The trend lines are all headed in the wrong direction there. So tough exam, and if you're looking at that exam and you haven't started your studies yet, you need to get started right away. If you're already studying for that exam, I encourage you to follow your bar review's advice. If you're in our course, certainly what we're telling you to do. We've had greater success than the state average over a long period of time, and I think it's your best opportunity to be successful on that test. So, yeah, that's pretty cheery news, isn't it? Well, Happy New Year to you, too. So that's some things that I see going on in California. I've talked a little bit about some of the jurisdictions. I just want to say that in Florida, what we see coming in 2017 will probably be more of the same. Really difficult exams, off-the-wall question choices in terms of essay topics. In 2016 in Florida, we saw the examiners pick subjects that they had not tested in the essay format ever, suddenly appearing on the exam. I expect more of that in 2017. I think the exam will continue to be a surprise to people, and I continue to expect results to decline overall across the state. So no opportunity for reciprocity in Florida, certainly no opportunity for the UBE. Anything you hear in that regard is pure rumor. There's absolutely no movement that we see in that direction and no momentum towards that at all. The former Florida Bar president tried to push for reciprocity and was soundly rejected by that across the board by the membership. And I don't think any of his successors are at all interested in revisiting that. So that's kind of the news coming out of Florida. Georgia, well, hopefully they'll get their scoring right and continue to move forward. That test continues to be difficult, but we're continuing to see students persevere and press on. But it is a tough exam in Georgia with a very low pass rate as well. Texas, not much in the way of news for those of you taking the Texas bar exam. Continues to be a 2.5-day test with a lot of crazy Texas-specific stuff. But if you're taking the Texas bar, you understand Texas is crazy to start with. That's just my view. And so no surprises. We had some great results from our Texas students. Wonderful stories of people who had failed the bar repeatedly, came to us, took our approach, and were successful. And great results for them. I think that Texas may ultimately move towards the UBE. It's being considered now at some high-level conference discussions between law schools and the judiciary and the bar. But I think we're at least 2 or 3 years away if that's going to happen at all in Texas. In California, well, I've already talked about the changes that we see coming there. And then in the UBE, I think we're going to see a lot of people flocking to the UBE, particularly foreign-trained attorneys. If you're a foreign-trained attorney and your choices are California, Texas, or the UBE in New York, I think it's a no-brainer. Take the UBE in New York. Much easier exam than the other two. You still can't waive into other jurisdictions, but you got a much better chance of getting into the bar in New York. And I think generally for people taking the bar, if you've got a choice about where to sit for a jurisdiction, I would look really carefully at any UBE jurisdiction, whatever's convenient and close to you. Take the test there and waive into whatever jurisdictions you want based on your score. So really see growth in that particular part of the bar exam world, and I think it's a good step. Well, the other thing that we did pretty consistently throughout 2016 is that I interviewed and did case studies with a lot of passing and successful students, and I invite you to check out any of those. They're all wonderful and unique in their own ways. I don't know that I can tell you that I have a favorite, but there's been a lot of comment about the interview that I did in episode 120 with Carla Brightson. She's a Jamaican attorney who took and passed the New York bar on her first try. And wow, it's a great story, and she's really an amazing young woman. Invite you to check that out. But literally, I can just go through all of these different interviews I did, and they were all great ones. One that I want to particularly point out to you is episode 84. I had the opportunity to interview the founder of Holosync. That's the audio meditation program that we use as part of our course. He's the founder of Centerpoint Research Institute. His name is Bill Harris. And we had a great interview in which he talked about the importance of mindfulness and meditation when you're focusing and studying for the bar exam and in life generally. It was a great opportunity to spend some time with a man who has shared the stage with the Dalai Lama, and he's generally regarded as one of the real thought leaders in the world today. So that was really a wonderful opportunity to spend time with him. Well, I could go on. I said I'd keep this short, and here I am at about 30 minutes, so I apologize. There was a lot going on and a lot to talk about. We certainly finished the year, I guess, on a somewhat controversial note. I talked about the importance of diversity in the bar and the importance that we place here at Celebration Bar Review on working with people from all kinds of backgrounds and people who have been marginalized and whose voices are not being heard as clearly as we think they ought to be, and the importance to us of being part of that world. And our continuing commitment is going to be to anyone who's trying to get into the bar for whatever reason, to give them the opportunity to be successful on the test. Whether they've taken the bar before or they haven't, whether they're foreign trained or they're trained in a U.S. bar jurisdiction, doesn't matter. We're glad to work with you. We want to help you. We want your voice to be heard in the bar of your state. And that's going to continue to be the driving purpose as we go into 2017. I've said elsewhere that I think that the rule of law is under attack, but I honestly believe it's never been more important than now for people to be members of their bar, to take their legal training and skills and to apply them in whatever way they find suitable as members of the bar. And we want to make sure that as many people who are qualified get to that point. So if you haven't yet checked out Celebration Bar Review, I hope you'll do so. I hope that this brief summary of the year and some of our favorite episodes will give you some things to think about and some information to check out. I'd love to hear from you with any comments, thoughts, questions as we move into 2017. I think it's going to be a challenging year in terms of the bar exam, but I'm confident that our students and our course will rise to that challenge. And so with that, I want to wish you a happy 2016 at the end of it and a really prosperous and wonderful 2017. Thanks so much, all of you who've supported this podcast over the year and a half that we've been offering it. Our membership and audience grows every single week. We're very humbled and very grateful for that, and grateful that we've got so many of you as good friends and listeners. So I wish you well. Thanks for being with me today, and we'll talk to you again next week as we start 2017 looking on the extra mile, and see you on the pass list. Well, that's our episode for today. Thanks so much for joining me and for being part of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. Now, if you'd like to catch up on prior episodes or check out the show notes, you can do that by going to our webpage at celebrationbarreview.com. Click on the link at the top of the page for podcasts, and there you'll find all of our previous episodes as well as the show notes. You can also subscribe to the podcast from that site, or you can go to iTunes and subscribe there. Just type in the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers, and you can subscribe and be part of the podcast series. And we would love to have you do that. While you're on the iTunes site, we would also really appreciate you giving us a quick, honest rating and review. That feedback is really useful to me as I prepare these episodes. It only takes about 30 seconds, so I hope you'll do that. Just type in the name of the podcast and give us your rating and review. Again, if you've got any questions or you'd like to know anything else about Celebration Bar Review or the courses that we offer, visit our website, or I invite you to contact us. My email is jackson@celebrationbarreview.com, and I look forward to hearing from you and to seeing you along the extra mile very shortly. See you on the pass list. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.